Hey, everybody. Yes, that is Ron Carter. And we are interviewing him today. And it's a big thrill. And I want everybody to know if you like Jazz on the Tube, Ron is one of our biggest supporters. And I can only imagine how many groups he helps based on the level that he helps us. Um, Today, we're going to talk. First of all, I want to tell everybody that Ron did a great interview with Rick Beato, which we're going to link below. You should see that as a sort of a companion piece to this. Also, there's a pretty good Wikipedia article, though of course I'll let Ron be the judge of that. Have you seen your Wikipedia article?
Not yet, but I'm sure you can tell me where it is. I can give you a
Oh,
report
okay.
on it.
It seems pretty good. It seems pretty thorough. But I was going to give you a chance to correct anything because they're known to sometimes get things wrong. In fact, I may be asking questions based on misunderstandings, but we'll clear those up.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of material that you can go through, starting with Rick's interview, to learn about to learn about Ron Carter. I'm a little flustered, I got to admit.
I'm just a guy
Uh,
sitting down in the chair. Come on.
okay, Ron Carter, the musician. There's a lot of information about that, but we want to talk today about Ron Carter, the educator. And as a curveball, we also want to talk about Ron Carter, the student. And we have a lot of young musicians that listen to this program. We have a lot of educators, and I think we can get a lot of insight into how to be a good student, how to be a good educator. Uh, why did Detroit produce so many amazing musicians? What was going on there? And questions like that.
I'll get as many answers as I can give you.
Okay. Uh, First of all, everybody should know about the website roncarterjazz.com. That's roncarterjazz.com. And we're going to be talking in detail about Ron's educational initiatives, which are, by the way, not new. He's been an educator for a long time, if you weren't aware. But his internet initiatives are fantastic, and we're going to be talking about those in detail. But I want to talk about history. So, Ron, somehow you were made a member of the Alabama uh, Music Hall of Fame, but you were
Yes.
born in Michigan. What's
Yes.
the story there?
Well, this Birmingham is what it is a town of interest right now. They wanted to have a place that would put them on the map, in that so many people who are from Birmingham or their relatives are from Birmingham, who have turned out to be famous people in the world of something. And this is a specific group of people were interested in jazz musicians who are from Birmingham. Well, my mom's mom was from Birmingham, Alabama, so I qualified as one of the people who had the historic background to qualify for one of the people to be put in a place like this Birmingham Jazz Hall of Fame. So last spring, they invited me down there to be the first inductee. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think so.
Into the Birmingham Jazz Hall of Fame. And they have a great building. They have great artifacts from great players. They have great musical background. So those of you who travel, if you happen to end up in Birmingham, Alabama, part of the world, stop by and give them hello and give them some support and see who they have inducted into this Birmingham Hall of Fame.
So that was through your mom's mom.
Yes.
It's interesting because of my mom's mom, I get to be an Italian citizen. So it's very interesting. And I want to start here. We've heard this phrase, the greatest generation. And there's a lot of great generations, let's face it. But I have to think one of the greatest generations, and it was many generations, were the people that came out of the South, went to places like Pittsburgh and Detroit and Chicago, and went through a complete transformation. They had great opportunities that they didn't have back down South, and better jobs, better housing, and most important, they took the advantage of creating an amazing educational system for their children. Any place on earth at any time in history would be lucky to have some of the schools that were in Detroit, that were in Pittsburgh, that were in Chicago, Fort Worth, Los Angeles, even. And it's something that today I think everybody needs to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to the quality of education we're giving our children. Um, so you started cello at age 10. Now that's unusual for
Yeah,
anybody.
11 to 12 is more accurate. They keep separating the numbers, but if we
Okay.
say age 12, it's probably a little more accurate.
Okay. by coincidence, I have a nephew. He's 18 and he's getting ready for his auditions at Curtis,
Oh, wow.
At Eastman. Yeah. So I have a little insight into what's involved in a child getting on that track and staying on it all the way through admissions to one of the top conservatories. So you obviously, how did you fall in love with the cello, or was it thrust upon you? How did you discover the cello?
Well, at some point, there's a lady who was ultimately was the music director of the system in Ferndale, Michigan. And she came by one day at the school with these, I told her, children, come to this room after 1 o'clock or whatever it was, and she had laid out a tabletop full of instruments,
Mm,
and she announced that she was going to start an orchestra in this elementary school called Grant School, and she said, I want your children to walk around the table and just kind of plunk on them and find one that you think you want to spend some time having fun with, basically.
mm.
And the cello at that age seemed like the one that I had the least problem making a sound of any kind that appealed to me. And I asked, was this instrument available to study? And she said, yes, call your parents, we'd work out the details. And that was my first introduction to uh, cello, not necessarily the music, but cello itself.
And that was in Ferndale. Is that a suburb of Detroit?
Um, I'm not sure what you call it, a suburb or not. It, speaking of coming up from the north to south to the north, some person had purchased some land up north for the freed slaves from the south. And this group of people settled in an area that was called Ferndale.
Mm,
It was a very prosperous black community
mm.
to the extent that the here we go again. The white people decided there wasn't okay for them, so they bought most of the land back. So the land that was left from what they couldn't purchase was what I grew up in.
Okay.
Uh, uh, so and that's a term for what those communities were called. I can't think of it right now because I haven't thought along those terms in a really long time. It was not incorporated,
Mm-mm.
and the powers that be decided that they didn't need to be incorporated, which means they weren't eligible for any of the benefits of a incorporated area, town would
Mm-hmm.
have. So we were kind of basically on our own. The community,
Mm-hmm.
the black community, was basically on their own regards to any kind of, I would say, federal, any kind of city, local, state benefit that those groups of people that were unincorporated were entitled to have.
Mm. And yet there was this wonderful teacher.
Yes, who decided that she was going to bring some music to this school with all black kids up to kindergarten to eighth grade. Yeah.
And thanks to that, you put your hands on the cello for the first time.
Yes.
Wow. Now
Yes.
then you ended up at Cass Technical. Is that what they call it? Technical High? Cass Technical?
Yeah, called Cass Technical High School. It was like a junior college back in those days. But it was, in fact, a high school that you had to audition to get into the high school.
And it was a super high quality school for my understanding.
Yes.
And
Yes.
on the music side, I think some of our listeners are aware because of all the great musicians that came out of that program, but they had also other professional level education going on at
Yes. It
Cass
was
too.
sewing, architecture, uh, the arts in general, choirs, art dances, um, mechanical engineering is really a complete um, worldly preparation educational environment and a great music department.
And everything at a very high level.
Absolutely. No question about that.
Now I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't give you preparation and you may not know the answer, and I don't know the answer either. I could have researched it. How did such a great school come to be in Detroit?
I have no idea, but they were able to reach around to the suburbs of Detroit
Mm.
and hold auditions for kids who were recommended by their local teachers to audition for this place called Cass Tech downtown Detroit, which is a good high school for kids who were seen to be exceptionally bright at whatever their specialty was.
Did you have a long commute from where you lived to school?
Probably so, because it was downtown and we were like a not downtown residents.
So would you get there by bus? Did you take your cello with you on
By bus, yeah,
by
yeah.
bus?
Hmm.
Um, I believe, didn't Charles Mingus also start on cello, and he and Eric Dolphy used to play music on the bus? I seem to remember hearing that story on the way to
That's the
school.
story, but I don't know how to confirm it or not.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about family support. Speaking of Eric Dolphy, I remember hearing the story from a friend of his, and it's a lady who plays piano, Bertha Hope. Is that right? Elmo.
She's a piano player. I don't know if the story. I don't know the story. What's the
Oh yeah,
story?
they grew up together. There's a beautiful picture of them sitting together on a
Oh,
couch.
wow.
The family built a practice studio for Eric in their backyard. You know, and I see, for instance, in my nephew's situation, family's got to be involved because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of expense. Uh, can you tell us a little about how your family and the support you
Well,
got?
my family did not build a space for us to practice in.
Okay.
Um, I'm from a large family. I have a brother and six sisters.
Oh, wow.
And my father loved music.
Okay.
And ultimately, what he did is he had us. One sister played violin, one
Oh,
sister played viola, one played piano, and I was a cello player at the time. So we had our own string quartet. And
okay.
that was my family's one of their influences on group playing, for example. Uh, we had our usual amount of chores to do, to cut the grass, do the snow and stuff, but we always were allowed time to practice on our own and be a part of the family quartet. My parents never played instruments on their own. My father made a ukulele out of cigar box and rubber bands, but they were not professional or amateur players by any means.
Mhm.
No.
Were your siblings also educated at Cass?
Um, Two of them were. The others were. At that time, schools were now opening up to more of a racially mixed educational environment. So my sisters and brothers went to other schools. I was the only one with the Cass Tech who had that kind of specifically oriented, talented educational view.
Gotcha. What was the environment like at Cass for a music student?
Well, as a music student, you had to play in the band, you had to play in an orchestra, you had to play in the choir, you'd be in the choir. And I played tenor in the marching band, for example.
Oh,
And I played B-flat clarinet in the concert band.
okay.
And I played cello in the chamber group and the symphony orchestra we had. And I was in the choir. They're all musical activities involving music broadly.
Hmm.
And there were some wonderful classical players. Several of them went on to be major classical players in orchestras throughout the states. You know, conductors and composers. You know, and those who didn't do music, they went to some other kind of professional organization just because of the system at Cass Tech that was a part of the system, organizing and working out the issues in your particular field.
I mean, it's the only high school you know because that's where you went. But
Yes,
I can tell you right now, my high school wasn't as well organized, and I have a
yes.
feeling a lot of our listeners have no idea how well organized and thought out a high school can be. I think Cass should be a model to everyone.
It was incredible. And unfortunately, like you say, has no place. They're not allowing the arts to be a major factor in the kids' education now, and that's too bad.
Yeah, because when we look at cultural achievement, we tend to focus on the individual, which is you have to because they're the ones that carry the banner. But there has to be a community, a structure
Mhm.
behind the individuals so that they can go through the very long growth process. You don't learn to be a musician in a week or a year. It takes a long, long time, a lot
Yes,
of hills you have to climb.
sure.
So I think when we see a great musician on a bandstand, we should be thinking not only about that person's accomplishment, but there was a community, I mean that in the broadest sense of the term,
Yeah.
that valued children and valued their education. And you're seeing the fruit of that.
Okay, well, they have more and more uh, papers presented about how the student who studies music at an early age, what kind of adult they ultimately end up by being and their contribution to their community, to their neighborhood, to their specific business. They found plenty of examples of a school that had an arts program, a music program, where those kids who were involved in that program were different kind of citizens in terms of their social commitment, their community commitment, ultimately their rank in society as far as a successful, however you ultimately define that. And somehow, one of my friends, Ken, had a great line. He said he longs for the day when the music students get the scholarship and the football players have to sell cookies for uniforms.
It's weird because we claim that our civilization, the Western civilization, comes from Greece, ancient Greece. Well, music was one of the arts that they taught. It was one of the essential arts. So why are we dropping it? It makes no sense. So I imagine. So how did you even learn? Because every child goes through this process. You don't really know the larger world, and then bit by bit you learn about it. When did you realize that there were conservatories that you could go to once you got out of high school, and that there were great ones, and that if you could get into one, you could spend 4 years going even deeper into music?
You knew that from high school because high school was built on that kind of advanced education, educational systems. If you get out of high school and you want to keep playing, where else can you go? Schools like Cass Tech had a sheet, had a counselors, they called them back in the day, who would advise you on what your next step could be educationally if you wanted to further your career in auto mechanics or fashion design. And in my case, music. They knew what schools were having auditions, what colleges, what conservatories you call them, had outstanding music programs, and they would connect you to the audition process, to when the person from Juilliard or Curtis or Eastman would come by Cass Tech on a specific day to audition kids who maybe were ended by going to their school, going to Curtis or Juilliard or Oberlin. They would come to Cass Tech and on a specific day and audition kids from Cass Tech who thought that who were looking to further their musical education, and they'd audition in and see who got in.
So the young
Cass Tech was responsible for that.
So the young students were given a vision of what was possible, and then everything was facilitated for them, both in education and getting
Yes.
in the pipeline.
Yes.
So you went to Eastman, Rochester, on the shores of Lake Ontario.
Freezing my ass off.
Exactly. The snow belt of New York.
Yes. Yeah.
Toronto doesn't get much snow, but as I learned when I used to go there a lot, and I realized the wind goes from west to east, and it takes all that water off Lake Ontario and dumps it on Buffalo and Rochester.
And Syracuse. Yes.
Syracuse. Yeah. And now, had you added the bass before you went to Rochester, or did that happen at Eastman?
Well, it happened in high school, actually.
Okay.
Back in the day when they had these conferences, they would have the local school provide what we used to call wallpaper music, behind the conference talking and lunch and stuff like that.
Really?
And they would come to Cass Tech, and as it had a pretty renowned local school reputation of music, they put together a string orchestra or an orchestra from some kind from Cass Tech to perform at these conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And they're wonderful players because they'd been playing for long since they were 12. You're really into the music. And I thought that I was equal to the task of being able to perform this wallpaper music for the IBM executives at a conference or whatever they had, NEA conference, And I thought that I wasn't getting an opportunity to do that, So I look around one day and the bass player, whoever he was graduating January of 1955. I said, okay, well, if he graduates, if my subtraction is good, 1 from 1 is 0. But they need a bass player, so okay, I'll be that guy.
Okay.
So I talked over my parents, who agreed that my view was reasonable, and they accepted my logic. So I traded in my cello, got a bass with some lessons with the Detroit Symphony bass player. I was informed that the guy from Eastman was coming to audition from Eastman School of Music, coming to Detroit for the audition at the school, and it turned out that the person auditioning was George Michael, who was the bassist, who was the cellist at that time with the Detroit Symphony.
Hmm.
I played for him. He said, "I think I will get you a scholarship if you're interested to Eastman for 4 years."
Wow.
So of course I'm interested, and my parents loved the idea, so off I went fall of 1955.
How long had you been playing the bass when you got that opportunity?
6, 7 months.
Oh wow, okay. So I imagine if you've been working on the cello, the transition to the bass is not a huge leap. It's not like going from zero.
Well, it's always going from zero if you don't play the bass at all,
Okay.
and
Okay.
you're thrown into an environment where you got to be able to produce a certain level.
Okay.
It's like going from 0 to 0.3, something like that, you know.
Okay. So
And I
so
was able, huh?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I was able to perform well enough, even at that early stage, that Mr. McKell saw some skills that he thought would be interesting and worthwhile to have him recommend me as a student who was eligible with the skill level and grade level to be able to be a full-time student at the Eastman School of Music. Can you get this kid a scholarship?
Wow, and you did that was you said 6 or 7 months of from zero to the time you got a chance to audition for Eastman.
Yes.
So I have to guess that you really know how to work because
My father taught me discipline
okay.
and being productive at my attempts. So I've kept that routine in my head for all these years.
And because I'm always trying to educate my nephew too, it's like and this is sort of from left field, but what is that discipline? What's a day like? Um,
I'm not sure. It's a pretty broad question.
I know, but you know, you wake up.
Wait a minute.
Okay,
I'm
good.
88, so it's hard to go back to those days you're
I
asking me about.
know, I know, I know.
And he's eight. At 18, I was a freshman going away to college already. So I'm not sure I can relate to that kind of question. If you could kind of either change the color of it or
But
be
we
more
can
specific.
we can assume that you were spending a lot of time with your instrument.
Well, as much as I had, I mean, I was away from home for the first time in my
No,
life.
I mean in those months where you went from picking up the bass to now someone's giving you a scholarship.
Yes, I had chores. I'm a family of 8 kids, man. We were all one for all for one. That kind of way that was.
Okay.
My brother and I would shovel our neighbors' snow. We would cut our neighbors' grass. We would do chores in the house that my father was working a full-time job that the girls couldn't do, my mom couldn't do. I mean, we were a full-time community inside our house. So I wasn't just getting up at 9 o'clock in the morning, playing bass for 12 hours and
Okay.
taking a nap. No, part of my family job was whatever it was assigned. Bank the fires at night, take the ashes out in the morning. I don't know if you know about those kinds of things back in the day. I had a paper route to get up at 5 o'clock and get on my bicycle and sell papers with customers on my route. My neighbor, I was busy, man. So if they think that I woke up one morning and played great, that's a Channel 7 news story. That's not true. I was disciplined. I had a goal in my mind. My father, watching him function in this kind of society at the time. My sisters were encouraging. I had some go away to the contest of upstate Michigan. I will win a few medals as a whatever they call those kind of things. My sister and I went to where we broke the color barrier at Interlochen.
Oh, really?
16. Yeah. So my history goes way back, and I don't have the detail in my head to answer those specific questions.
Sure, sure.
But we were taught to be responsible for ourselves and for our community.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a goal in mind, you got to work toward that goal. You got to kind of set some things that may be in the way of that goal far enough away that doesn't interfere with you reaching your goal. And it turned out my goal was to be a wonderful player. And given the chores I had to do to function as a family member of 10 people, I had to find a time when I could just focus on practicing. So I would allow me 2 hours a day or so just to do that every day. And as I got better, my teachers recommended teachers who helped someone who was a student who was above their level of teaching. That's what it was. And that's why when I was coming up as a cellist, I had 3 or 4 different teachers who were various along my life studying were better than the previous teacher. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was my growth ring in the tree of listing on the tree of rings in the tree stump, you know. And I carried that mindset and my responsibility to the level I want to be responsible for, and to when I practice, learn how to practice, make practice as disciplined as everything else in life. Uh, Here I am at 88 with the same concept.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So now you're at Eastman in Rochester, which is even colder than Detroit. Is it colder than Detroit? I think so.
It's cold as cold, man.
Okay. Cold is cold. That's true. And now you're in Rochester at Eastman, and you discover jazz, or at least that's the story I'm getting from Wikipedia. But obviously you.
Especially correct. I would go home from Detroit, from Rochester to Detroit for the spring break and the summer break. And I would work at the various jobs in Detroit for the summer. One summer I was a playground recreation director. I would go to the playground in the morning at 9 o'clock, take all the gear out of this box, play with the kids, make sure they didn't get hurt, got rough with the tools, and then collect all the tools at sunset, come back in the tool shed and do the same thing for the summer. I had several jobs like that during the course of my 3 or 4 years at Eastman summers in Detroit.
Mhm.
Along the way, one of my neighbors, the first summer I was home doing that, he was putting together a group of guys to play at the Wayne University summer fraternity parties and stuff like that
Mm.
down on the river. And he said, I'm putting together a band together. I need a bass player. Can you do this? I said, well, I'm not sure what you asked me to do. We talked and talked and talked and talked. And he gave me some records to listen to and some tunes to look at. You know, well, I could really read great because I've been in classical music all my life, and reading the music was not a problem. I didn't know what they were supposed to do with the music because it's just the melody, you know. So we worked it out. And the piano player was a fan of Bud Powell's, and the drummer was a fan of Max Roach's, and the alto player like Paul Desmond. So I'm into a bunch of guys who had fans of the music, who had done research and knew who they liked
Mm-hmm.
to play with if they had the chance, you know, and who influenced their concept of form and changes and intonation, stuff like that. That was my first exposure to being a player. And as I got to Eastman, I got better at it, and I joined a house band that played with the guys who came in from the Canadian tour down to New York,
Mm-hmm. So
and
they'd be in
I went
Montreal,
to Rochester. Yeah,
Toronto, and they yeah, and
Little Falls, Herkimer, then down to Rochester, and then on to New York. And I had a chance to play as I was learning the music, but the guys who come to New York from Rochester to Rochester, it's a single. Slim Gaillard,
Oh,
Sonny
really? You met
Stitt,
him?
yeah, Sonny Stitt, who
Oh.
acts like that. And we were the house band, so I got a chance to listen to the jazz bands, Horace Silver's early group, and Dizzy's early group, and Carmen McRae's early group. So I was listening to this on my every night that I was working as a sideman at the Ridgecrest Inn, which is the name of the club. I was being involved and encased in this music that they were playing night in and out with the players at the time. And we would play, have 40 minutes and then bring them on, and they'd play their set, and then we'd play one more set, and then they would close the night. Stuff that, you know, back when they had two groups every night. One group was always the main act, and the second group was the backup band if they needed to, or they would be keeping the people there or intermission kind of stuff. So I had heard enough. I played with all these wonderful people, and I had a chance to hear them night and night and night. Early Teddy Kotick and early Sam Jones and Ike Isaacs and all those wonderful bass players back in the day who were coming to New Rochester by way of coming from Canada to return to New York City on the train line. And they said, well, look, when you graduate, come to New York, because New York always needs a good bass player. I said, okay, well, here we go. And I'll see you when I graduate. I graduated in June and got to Rochester, got to New York in August.
Okay. In the Wikipedia article, they talk about a place called the Python
Yes,
Room.
Python Husband. And one of the parts of Rochester itself was the black community in Rochester. And some friends wanted to put together a jazz program, a jazz music club for them, since Rochester was still on the segregated side of segregation.
Mhm.
And they had because their neighborhood was on Clarissa Street was the main drag through Rochester, and there was a bar there, and the guy said, let's have some music in this bar. And the guys who knew the city better than I did, because they were from Rochester, they looked around and said, there's a family in Rochester, the Mangione family, who were great jazz fans, enthusiasts. And as it turns out, they would always host the single acts who came to Rochester at their home for lunch or for a meal. They had a restaurant. So I met all these guys on a more personal level at those kind of Mangione meals. And so one of the guys who put the band together at the Rochester club called the Pith Out Hall was Pee Wee Ellis, who ultimately went along to be the James Brown writer and arranger and a wonderful saxophone player. And I did start when I wasn't playing with the house trio at the Ridgecrest Inn. That would be having with Pee Wee, and the local drummer Roy McCurdy was the drummer at the time, who went on to play with Nancy Wilson and Cannonball, and local guys who just stayed in Rochester, who made the Rochester scene enjoyable to play as and go by and listen to.
So Rochester, between the musicians that were coming through and the community, was a pretty good scene for jazz.
Yeah, very much so in the Black community. Yeah.
This is something I always like to talk about on our podcast. Rightfully so, we think of New York and we think of New Orleans, of course, and Chicago, L.A. But jazz comes from everywhere. There were little scenes everywhere. In the Wikipedia article, they make reference to the Chitlin Circuit, and I first heard about this long ago from a friend of mine, a percussionist named Jerome Cooper, and he said, "Ken, you have to understand, there used to be a circuit." And there was a big audience. And once you could just get on that circuit and be playing in front of all kinds of audiences, Black audiences. And he was concerned. I think we were talking about this in 1980s, in the 80s. He said, that circuit's gone, it's disappearing. And he thought it was a very important thing for the development of the music. Can you talk a little bit about what you know of that circuit?
Jazz has never been big in that circuit.
Oh, okay.
It's always been the rhythm and blues and the early rock and rollers who started with the jazz community on the Chitlin Circuit. I know of those stories because I've talked to those musicians, and I've been on there much later in my career to work gigs. Things have gotten maybe this much better since then, but my personal experience with being down there was not enough to discuss. But I do know the stories because I know those guys who went down there. B.B. King's band, I knew all those guys very well. I knew the guys in James Brown's band really well. They would tell me the stories about the Chitlin Circuit, and then you couldn't eat the restaurant. You had to go to a neighbor's home. Had a basement that they could turn into a bedroom for the three guys in the band, and they would take turns. Yeah, his stories are correct, but my experience with physically doing that don't exist. I know the stories, and I trust the guys who told me the stories, so I would agree with his view and his commentary, as his descriptions are much better than mine.
Gotcha. So you graduated from school in June, and in August you're in New York City. You're 20.
Well, I don't know. I'm older. I'll tell you that.
Older than, and now from the Wikipedia article, it talks about Chico Hamilton and it talks about Don Ellis. Two of the most creative band leaders, and you landed with them very quickly.
Well, okay.
Do you remember?
Chico's band was that I came to New York and I had met him in Rochester on one of those jazz shows that went through town. He said that he's going to New York, and he thought that the cello player, Nat Gershwin, was going to leave the band when they got to New York. And if I was still interested, he would hire me as a cello player. Well, I said, okay. I didn't know enough to know that he wasn't being truthful or not. I said, okay. Okay. So I got to New York, and I went down and see him at Birdland. And I told him, well, I'm here. He said, well, change your plans. The bass player decided he wanted to go back to Seattle. Wyatt Ruther, really good player with the band. And I need a bass player now. Can you do that instead? I said, absolutely. So I left for a tour with Eric Dolphy in the band with Dennis Buttermere, Nat Gershwin with the Chico Hamilton band for maybe 4 or 5 months. And then the band decided to break up. Eric decided to stay. Chico decided to stay, and the other two guys went back to California. That was the fall of 1959, early 60.
And then you had a early professional experience with Don Ellis.
Doing the recording situation. That my
Oh,
earlier
recording.
days of recording. Yeah. He had a record called How Time Passes, where he's using a half valve, a four valve trumpet, a half valve, and interested in all the different rhythms. Seven, I call it hat size, medium, with the tempo, would be the tempo marking, medium hat size, and Charlie Persip and Jackie Byard were on these recordings. We had an interesting time, the early stages of the later on avant-garde freedom movement. This is like 1962, way before those guys started. I got about 20 minutes left, Ken, so let's move
Got,
this along.
gotcha. Okay. So you went from Eastman pretty much into the deep water right away.
Well, I was 6'3", I wasn't too deep.
All right. Hey, last question. Last question. Well, first of all, we do want to make sure everybody knows roncarterjazz.com. And we want to make sure everybody knows that you were a professor at City College
20 years.
for 20 years.
And I only missed 2 classes in 20 years. I
Wow.
was at the full schedule. I was teaching 22 hours a week. I was teaching jazz ensemble, arranging, 6 students, a jazz history class, full time.
Wow.
And I missed 2 days.
That's better than most students.
I've tried to instill with them, Ken, I'm responsible to them. I'm responsible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And teaching and students are 2 ways. You got to be responsible to me. Your job is to do the homework, for example. Follow the assignments. Pay attention. Take notes. That's part of your job. My job is to make sure you do what I ask you to do so you can kind of be productive in whatever it is you want to do. You know, it's difficult now because there are enough things in the way of that easy to have a focus. Back in the day, you didn't have all the things going on, so you got to really convince them that the new things are happening. Okay, but there are other ways to learn what you're trying to learn, and I prefer my way than your way. But let's compare ways and see how we can make this work.
Yeah, for instance, we didn't have smartphones
None,
or internet, none of this stuff. This is so
none,
hard for
no.
young people to imagine. And I think in a way, it was better because there was less choice. So the choices that you made, you tended to go deep into them as opposed to just flittering around on the surface of everything.
Well, I think most teachers are going to feel the same way, and most students will not feel that way at all.
I know. My nephew
What,
can't
what I try to do, what I try to do, what I do with all my students is when we have lessons, we don't tape the lessons because why would I want you to go home with a terrible sound with a iPhone as a sample of how the lessons went? I want you to hear that in your ear. So we have pencil and paper. Kids, you know what that is? Pencil and paper. Okay, here's a pad. It goes like this, and then page 1, the date. Yeah. And once I get them to commit to this concept, Ken, of using their language skills and what literary skills they may have to write down an idea in 25 words or less. This idea is their second teacher when they go home. They can always read this notebook that I insist that they bring to my lessons, in my class.
Mm-hmm.
They can read this at any point. They don't have to find out they run out of batteries. I mean, that bad light. No, this lesson is telling you exactly what the teacher expects from you and what mistakes you made during the last lesson or the last class or the assignments. And once I get them to commit to this, today would be a new way of doing information, they appreciate the lesson more because they have it physically in their hands. I try to encourage teachers to do this process with the students to give them a chance to be more proactive in the lesson, not just sit down and press a button and it kind of goes by themselves. No, I want you to write these words down in 25 words or less. And when the lesson's over, read them back to me to see if you was shucking and jiving and what that you didn't write down. You didn't write this down, man. Get out of here. Stuff. So I can monitor their honesty and their behavior following my assignments.
Gotcha. And the word honesty, one of the things I love about music, besides the fact that I just love music, is it's a profession where there's not much bullshit. Like
None.
You can either do it or you
You
can't.
can't.
And there's I mean, even brain surgery, I'm sorry to say, there are people maybe shouldn't be brain surgeons, but they are anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, you know, the old joke is what do they call the doctor that graduates at the bottom of his class? Doctor. What do they call
yeah,
a musician that unemployed? I mean,
yeah.
it's one of the last meritocracies in our modern era. So now I'm going to throw well, actually, let's talk about how you offer your education now, how you educate people now.
Okay. Well, one way I'm doing it, Ken, is that I have my own books. You know, and my books are not like the standard classical books. We all the bass players started with the Nane and the Samando and the Billy because that was the Bible that most teachers learned from who are playing jazz taught their students.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's not how that's not my concept of playing the bass. And I've started a library of about 15 books now of various concepts of mine. One is called Ron Carter Drops, which is the books go Look at the Doom, those kind of things, and to show where I use them and how I use them. And the next one is called Behind the Changes, which shows a page of me, how I altered changes for blues, and I got rid of them in a couple of standard tunes. My way. I'm using my method in my publishing company books to show the bass players who are my students how I do whatever it is I do
Mhm.
with a skill that I'm sharing with you.
Mhm.
When
Mhm.
you leave my room, you will not sound like me.
Mhm.
You better not sound like me. You will sound like you, whatever you is, with the skill levels I'm showing you. We play across the bass, not so much, not horizontally like this.
Mhm.
We play
Mhm.
this way.
Mhm.
And I think that that's one of the primary differences between the classical teachers and the jazz teachers, the jazz bass players and the classical bass players, who play the bass completely different from each other.
Mhm.
And with my books, I'm able to show my students who are uh, doing some Broadway shows occasionally, and they play every Thanksgiving, and the pickup orchestra play the Brandenburg and the Hallelujah Chorus, those kind of religious events that require more than one player, more than one bass player. I can teach them the basic skills, but I can't make them competitive with the person who's been auditioning for Philharmonic orchestras all of his life.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
uh, but I use my books to help show them these are the skill levels I've used to do what attracted me to use a teacher.
Mhm. Mhm.
Not play like me,
Mhm.
just use my skill level that I develop, and I'm continuously evolving it with my series of 8 or 9 books, roncarterjazz.com.
And in
Having
addition,
said that,
go
if
ahead.
you go to this other site, roncarteruniverse.com, it's an interesting site it's kind of like a record discography of mine. roncarteruniverse.com. It shows a universe with all these stars. When you click on one star, it shows a record that I'm on.
Mm.
It shows the personnel. You go on YouTube, you can hear part of the tracks from this particular record. For us right now, so this covers about 1,100 records, and we're trying to do some every. We try to do a couple of sittings to go to increase this number. The number is supposed to be like 2,200, something like that, and we're halfway there now. But it's a nice site for nerds out there who want to just see what it is I'm supposed to be able to do, or my history of making records. And it's again, I recommend if you go on this site, have lunch first because you'll be so consuming you will miss lunch.
That's great. And
But
you
then
also,
again, what I try to do with my kids is show them how many choices they have
mm,
and what variety awaits them. But you need to have a plan, and I insist to them that my plan works with my books.
gotcha. Now, in addition to the books, do you also do online education?
I did during the course of the pandemic.
Okay.
It, and they have not really figured out how to play with Zoom. You know, I can't play with them. They haven't figured that out yet. I prefer them come to my home, my
Gotcha.
studio. But I enjoyed. I learned another way to teach because I couldn't touch them. I couldn't see
Yeah.
exactly how they were holding the bass
Mm-hmm.
because they were in London or somewhere. They weren't in my room, so to speak. They
Gotcha.
weren't right there.
Gotcha.
Uh, It
Hey,
has its drawbacks, but I learned another way to show people how to play the instrument. So I was grateful for my openness to make this pandemic, not knowing how long it's going to last. And when the Wi-Fi went out at your house or in my studio, there was just an interruption. It was a drag, you know. I'm glad we're back to where we are as far as that's not necessary, but in person is always best for me.
Gotcha. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. This is a very fundamental question.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
Oh, wait a minute. We have a lot of fans who go and hear the music, who may not have ever had a musical education. They didn't have the opportunity. And they look at a band and they see the horn players out front, or if it's a piano trio, they see the piano and they get that, hey, there's a melody and there's improvisation. They know there's a rhythm section. They see it. They know it plays a role. They know the bass is part of the rhythm section. Tell us, what does the bass player do?
He does everything. Unless he's a leader, he does everything but collect the pay. Every note he plays, Ken, does the following things. Each note I play has this information. What the form is. What key we're in. What kind of rhythm is this tune? The bossa nova, swing, two beat. The pitch of the band. The presence of the beat. And the sound of the instrument. Each note, that's 6 things. How many things is that, Ken?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with the sound.
Each note I played times one set does all of those things. And when they come to see a band, I don't want them to feel that unless you know those things specifically to see the band, I don't want them to distract you from the music, the broad effort of these 3 guys of the trio. I like to have you understand that the bass player's job is at least 3 out. Each of these 3 things, that's his job, not just to be the last guy in the back of the band behind the palm tree. You know,
Right.
Any more than when you go to a classical concert, you're interested in what bass method this guy study,
right,
or what strings he has, or how old is his bass. I mean, it seems to me, Ken, that we kind of have different standards for accepting the music, and being inclined to know those kind of details when shouldn't get in the way of you enjoying the music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, years ago, as we speak, they just started having the operas and a band going across in English, translated in English. No, I would go on a limb and say, I don't think if you, even with that service, how many people know that they're really singing Italian in the opera, right? Because why would the guy know what kind of strings I have to go hit a jazz band? Or what kind of bass I'm having. That's part of him having to be able to enjoy the music.
Mm-hmm.
That's not critical. Just understand that there's a whole process going on. And the bass player, in this case, is taking sources from the 2 guys in his band and 2 other members in his band. I'm talking about a trio. Mm-hmm. He's taking information from these 2 other sources. His job is to combine them, eject them, build on them, along with his own personality to make the band do one of the things he thinks they're capable of doing. Mm-hmm. That's enough, Any more than is necessary, more than the orchestral listener to know that there's 6 bass players, and they practice together all the time, so they got the same notes, the same fingering, probably share the same rosin, different bass. They've learned how to play it sitting down. Someone's responsible for turning the page. I mean, why should they know all that to enjoy the opera?
Sure.
Any more than the guy who's come to be here, a jazz group must need to know my classical background. Or what key we're playing in. Hey man, if I told you, you probably wouldn't know what I meant, but that's okay. Just enjoy the effort that we make to make this music not just fun for us, but enjoyable for you.
Well, when you go to a sports game or you watch sports on TV, there's informed commentators helping you understand the beauty of what you're seeing. They're not detracting from the sport. They're not taking, but they're saying, "Hey, that was an amazing. Did you see what he did?" That can be helpful. I wonder what you think about this, and we'll leave this as the last note. Bass, BASS, right, for the instrument, but there's also a word bass, which another word for bass is foundation.
Yeah, we are that.
Okay.
You know,
Not,
and there have been groups who've been successful without that. Years ago, Jim Hall and Bob Brookmeyer had a duo. You
hmm
know, and I love that kind of stuff because it's really transparent what their thoughts are. Because the third guy, the bass player in this case, his sound's not there, his input is not there, his presence is missing in terms of a trio,
hmm
number three.
Yep.
So you got a chance to hear really Bob Brookmeyer and Jim Hall really exchanging breaths and changing and exchanging shoelaces because they're so transparent. You know,
hmm
uh, if you had a bass player to that duo, you hear what the duo doesn't have without a bass player. And those
Gotcha.
guys are valuable. I enjoy listening to Jim because I knew both of those guys and I played with them. They were just great players, and I enjoy playing with them more so I could show them what they missed.
hmm Gotcha. Gotcha. So it's roncarterjazz.com and
Yes,
roncarteruniverse.com. Make sure you pack a lunch if
yes,
you go to that site because you'll be
yes.
there a while.
That goes for you too now.
I will. I'm going. Believe me. I'm going to be there. Um, I want to thank you so much for your time
You're
and
welcome.
your generosity as a human being on all in all dimensions. And thanks for joining us.
Good. You be careful. And when you go to that universe site, contact me some kind of way and let me know that you saw it and what you thought about it.
I will. I will. And I'll have some other people do that too.
Yeah, it doesn't quite, it's free. It's 24/7. You can share it. It doesn't expire. And my greetings come to you when you watch it. It's a great site just to get involved with this level of information as it concerns me.